Hello guys and welcome to the channel. If this is your first time visiting, please be sure to check out my other videos and maybe consider a subscription to the channel. That would be appreciated. For you guys that are returning for the F23A1 rebuild series, I appreciate your continued support. In this video, we're going to be getting the tensioners and the gears and everything back on the front as well as the timing belts and get the whole thing timed properly. That will include putting the camshaft in the top up here. If you're just looking to set the timing on the front of your F23 engine, this video could be a good standalone video for that as well. We're going to go over that procedure, making sure we have all of our timing marks in place and get everything lined up before we bolt it all down. So let me get set up to get going here. We're going to start with getting the bottom gear and the crank position sensor back on the bottom. All right, the first thing I've done is I've put the crank bolt back in and I've rotated the crank until this keyway on top is pointed back up. And in my hand I had the key for that. Hopefully you kept up with this. I'm always very careful to make sure I know exactly where that's going to be, since it's just a small and easily lost item. If you can look on this, one end is flat, the other end is ramped. Without getting you in too close, it's really easy to see on top of the crank as well. At the back of it, the keyway, it ramps up. So that ramp end is going to go down and point towards the engine like this. And then of course your gear on the front of the crank has the keyway for it, and it's just going to slide over with these flat parts on the back. So you see my key piece is sticking out here now, and it's just going to be a matter of tapping that back down to its back flat. All right, that looks like that's going to be it there. I always use a Deblo or rubber mallet for that type of thing, or nylon. I hate to, the impact on something that's a little harder to break one of those teeth off. All right, for the next part, I'm going to get my crank position sensor back on. This, if you look, it has a lip that sticks out. That the part that's sticking out goes towards the engine. So it's going to go on like this with your wire is going to go back around the back. And then you have these two 10-inch places on the front. These sensors here, they have these little, I guess as you could call it, a locating dowel here. And there are actually holes in the oil pan to guide those in. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put this here, kind of get everything lined up. I'm going to go ahead and just get started, but I'm not going to screw anything down yet. Now I'm going to come back since that can kind of stay where it's at now. I'm going to get my bolts and run those in. If you kept all of your bolts together when you took the front end off, this is the longer bolts held the the oil pump on, and the smaller bolts, there should be 4 of them, and they're all for the crank position sensor. So that last one, you see this little dowel here is going to go in that bottom, and then at the top is where the sensor actually gets screwed down. Just like that. So just these 4 bolts, this holds the bracket in, and these 2 hold the sensors into their position, and they have the locating dowels that go into the oil pump that position them where they're supposed to be. I'm going to zip those down and I'll check for the torque spec for you. All right, well, just at a quick glance, I could not find the torque spec, but we're going to go with 104 inch-pounds for you torque Nazis out there. I'm quite certain that's going to be the right one. It's the same as all of the rest of the bolts in the front. For those of you who like to hear the torque-rich click, here we go. If you're freehanding this, which I really don't see a problem with, just keep in mind that the sensor parts up here are made out of plastic, so I would not put the Gorilla Fist on that. So just make sure that they're snug. You should be good to go. All right, guys, I just have the cam sitting in this position in the engine. I've already went out and I brake cleaned this really well. I've got all the dust and everything's collected on it since it's been sitting and all the old oil off of it. Our first thing that we need to do before we go any further in installing the front part is to go ahead and get the cam and the gear set up and the rocker arm assembly on the top here. The first thing that needs to happen, your kit comes with it should come with a new seal for the front of the cam, and it's going to go on right here. There are two sides to that. The open side goes towards the inside of the engine like that. Just be very careful getting that set on there. There's a spring behind it. That spring can pop out. It's just a matter of opening it up, setting it back down, putting it back around the inside part gently. Okay, after you have this down, make sure everything's lined up, and you're just going to push that. You can do it with your finger. It doesn't take any kind of seal press or anything like that. Just kind of get that lined up in the center there, where that wants to be, kind of where it wants to sit, and then there we go. So that's going to be right about there. And I'm going to pull this back out now so I have access to my journals here. All right, we're back again with my assembly lube, and I'm just going to coat each one of these journals. I've already cleaned these out with brake clean. Let me come back with my brake clean cloth here and get that out. And since this is just a regular cloth, I'm going to go back and make sure I didn't leave any blue fuzz. There are no bearings that go into this. The camshaft just sits on top of those journals there. So we're going to coat these really good with the assembly lube once again. And then we're just going to carefully place our camshaft on top of that. There we go. All right, now that we have those journals lubed up and I have the bearing, the seal on the front here, I'm going to go ahead and put the cam gear back on. This is keyed. Set this so the keyway is at the top. Of course, you can see on the gear here itself, it has the key. So let's slip that over. Take our bolt and go ahead and run that back in. You need to do that with an impact. It is a 14. Of course, it spun on me. All right, and there we go. So that should have a new seal installed, our cam gears on the front, and everything set in here ready to go. Okay, guys, this is what you've all been waiting for, the magical rocker arm assembly of the Honda VTEC system. This is kind of complicated. If I had done a video when I tore the head down, that video would have included putting a clamp, as you can see how I have it set up on here, from one side to the other to hold all that together. Those caps on the end of those two shafts that run through, they're spring loaded. You can see the springs that run through the shafts there, and they will pop off the end if you're not careful. I've gotten away before with just taking those off and setting them aside and making sure I didn't touch them anymore. With this one, my dumb self was outside cleaning this, and one of the ends popped off the cap, and then I had rocker arms and VTEC parts flying everywhere. So if you're doing this and if you haven't gotten to the stage yet where you're pulling the rocker arm assembly off the top, before you take those screws out, if you can help it, try to clamp it like I have it shown here, and then don't touch it afterwards, because it's just going to be a big mess. I kind of fumbled my way through it. I've never really disassembled and reassembled one, but I have now. I know how to do it. The intake side, that's the magical VTEC parts right there. I'll put this back in. This is not going to be any kind of video showing how VTEC works, but I'll just kind of give you a basic rundown of the process for that. And these four springs, hopefully you kept up with those when you tore your head down. We're going to get those back in right now. All right, the four springs, they do go on the intake side. You can see the cavities for them here, and the top of them is the flat side. It kind of has a cone that goes up. It's kind of hard to mess that up, but basically the open side goes down each one of those cavities. I believe Honda calls these lost motion. Without looking it up, I'm going to guesstimate the purpose of those is that when the VTEC rocker arm goes down, those push them right back up, so that they're not lazy and they stay down, and that assists with the whole VTEC operation. Before I go any further, I'm going to come back with my assembly lube again, and I'm going to go over the top of each one of those journals before I set that rocker arm assembly back down on top of that. It probably also wouldn't hurt to put the assembly lube across the cam. In fact, I'm going to do that right now. So I've just placed that across the cam lobes across. Okay, I have the rocker arm assembly now. The part that has this is the one that points to the rear. Also, the VTEC part that has actually the double rocker arms there goes on that side. I'm going to have to move my camera because I don't think that's going to work. All right, that will take some wiggling. It's not pretty, but I have that down where it's supposed to be. The interesting thing about those shafts that run through, not so interesting, is they have, where the bolts go through, they have to actually pass through those shafts. So the shafts have holes in them for your bolts to go through. So I'm going to come back with a Phillips head screwdriver. I'm just going to adjust each one of those and make sure that they're back where they're supposed to be. Everything I wiggle kind of side to side there. All right, and we should be ready to put our bolts back in the top here now. Okay, I have my 10 bolts now. I'm just going to push them down and kind of get them started. We do not tighten anything at this point. You could cause yourself a lot of headache and heartache. Okay, now that I have this halfway started, not really completely started, everything's kind of rocked this way a little bit, which is fine for where I'm at right now. But I'm going to move the camera to the front, and I'm going to show you what you need to do. Even though we're not timing the engine right now, we need to still get it almost in time, so that way when we go to tighten it down, when you tighten this down, it's actually going to start to push some of the valves down into the cylinders, and you want to make sure that your crank and your cam are lined up. Not exact, it doesn't have to be exact, but it has to be almost exact. I'm going to back the camera up and show you the front now. All right, if you remember, the keyway on the crank is pointed straight up and down, so that's top dead center for the #1 piston. And I don't know how well it's going to show up in this camera here, but the front of the camshaft is also marked. This one right here says up, so you want to rotate that until it's straight up and down at the 12 o'clock position. Okay, after getting the camshaft in the up position, we'll double check it since I've moved some things. What I've had to do is I've kind of had to rotate as I screwed these down, not even finger tight, but just starting them with my finger. Kind of have to pick up and get these on top of the valves that they go to. And then you want to make sure that the 4 springs, the lost motion springs, line up with that middle rocker arm, which is your VTEC. That locks this side into this when it's in VTEC. I will give you an overhead shot, and I'll give you a little more explanation about that whole VTEC crap. It doesn't really mean anything other than it runs better at higher RPMs. It's not something magical or mystical. Okay, this is 12 millimeters. I'm gonna come in with a 1/4 inch, and I'm just gonna run those down snug. I'm not going to use any kind of impact or zip tool to make sure those get down. Do it by hand so I can feel everything and make sure everything's going down right. And one last time, check the timing on the front. My crankshaft is up and my camshaft is pointed in the up position. All right, guys, I think I've got that snug down now. And I'm just going to show you what I was about. And I want you to understand everything about putting an engine together is super important. But the timing and making sure that all the timing components are where they're supposed to be nothing is going to work if those aren't lined up right. So what I did was, if you can see the top of the valve stem and then the rocker arm that goes down on top of it, as I'm working back and forth, I'm making sure that all of those are going down on top of the valve stem like they're supposed to. keeping in mind that this needs to be pointing as close to up as you can get it here, in conjunction with the crank being at top dead center. All right, so I went back and forth, side to side, until those were all on top where they're supposed to be on both sides, and that now they're just hand snug down. And one thing to keep in mind, the center parts of the rocker arm, you have two rocker arms for each side, but what this does is how the VTEC works is they're not independent. They actually one will only go down at when VTEC is not active. Once VTEC activates, both of these go down. So it shoots oil pressure through these, and these little springs pop out, or these springs pop these cylinders out, and they lock all this together so this all moves as one piece once VTEC is active. That's what that does. So you have to make sure that when you get each one of these down, that all of those pieces line up, because it is very possible for one of these to be off and they'll pop open. There's a little chrome cylinder inside that you have to get lined back up, and it's spring loaded. You got to pop it back in, use a pick or whatever. The main thing is when you take this apart, if you haven't already done so, clamp this. Save yourself a lot of headache. Don't let any of that come apart. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, we're going to torque that down, and we're going to go ahead and get ready to put the belts on the front and get the front end finished up, the tensioners and all. All right, these torque at 16 foot-pounds. As long as you work inside to out, you're going to be okay. You don't need to crisscross, so we're going to get these two, these two, these two, these two, and these two. We'll be finished. So remember 16, when you're working with a torque wrench, remember the final torque needs to be in one smooth motion. You don't want to kind of ease up to it. So once you feel like you're getting there, right there. Again, one smooth motion, 16. And we're going to work from this one to this one to this one, front to back. All right, we'll go back over just to make sure each one clicks. All right, we're good to go. Now, after you have that done, you don't want to rotate your crank. You don't want to rotate your camshaft. This is what's called an interference engine. That means that the pistons can hit the valves if the engine is not in time. They have engines that are considered non-interference where that will never happen. That's why it's so important on a Honda to have your timing belt replaced. Like I think it's 80,000 miles what they recommend, because if that thing breaks, your cam spinning, your crank spinning, it breaks, the momentum is going to continue to spin, but they're going to fall out of time with each other, and then your pistons are going to come up and start hitting your valves as they're going down, and they'll bend your valves, and it can ruin your entire engine. So if none of you actually knew that, which I suspect you do if you're watching a video like this, that is why it's so important to change your timing belt every 80,000 miles or so with a Honda engine. All right, we're going to move on to the front. We're going to go ahead and start getting the belts put on. All right, now that after we have the rocker arm assembly back in, we also have these smaller bolts that go here, and there's two more at the back. Those guys torque down to 109 foot-pounds. That should be the last part. Then this is a done deal. All right, I've got the cam gear back off now. I'm re-uploading this video because of this mistake that I made. I'm grateful that one of the people that watched it caught this. In this interest of being 100% accurate, I don't want to give anybody bad information about anything that I'm doing. And if I made a mistake, I'm going to go back and I'm going to fix it, and I'm going to make sure that what I'm telling you is the right thing. The first mistake that I made in that last video was that I did not put the back plate for the timing belt cover behind the cam gear. So I've used a impact wrench and I pulled that back off. Now I've got it here. I'm going to go ahead and get that on right here. So let's get that, just two of the holes right there, just get that zip back down. All right, this is the way that belt cover is going to go on. You can see it kind of sticks out in the front there, so that points towards the outside. And then you have these funky looking nuts that have these long shoulders on them that go through here. There's only two for this piece right here, so I'm going to get these two started and zip them in. All right, now that I have that zip back on, I'm going to go ahead and put my cam gear back on the front. And you do need an impact to do this, because if you try to, well, you can do it with a wrench. You just have to make sure that you're locking up the crank somehow, so nothing, or actually the head at this point, so nothing's rotating. And I'm just going to use an impact. All right, guys, I'm trying to get in here the best I can with what I've got. We're looking at the crank bolt, the gear, and all here. These are the timing marks for the crank. You can see here the key goes up to here, and that is the gear tooth that we're looking at for top dead center. That needs to be aligned with this and then straight up and down. You can see we're just a little bit clocked that way, so I'm going to back that up just a hair. We're going to call that good enough. All right, now I'm going to come back up and I'm going to show you where make sure that the camshaft is also pointed in its up position. All right, guys, and here on our camshaft, again, we have the up position here that we want to make sure is at 12 o'clock. And what another viewer pointed out that I should have mentioned is this cam has these marks on either side, here and here. They need to be in line with the top of the block as it comes across. That helps you to line it up. So if you watched the previous video, what I told you was not wrong, but that is an additional way to help you find the timing for the top dead center of your cam. All right, I think that looks pretty good here. I'm going to back up and just make sure 100% that this is straight up and down, and it's timed with the crank at the bottom. All right, before I can go any further here, it's time to get ready. The tensioners on the front of the engine ready for the timing belts that are going to go across. And since this engine has two timing belts, you have one on the inside that basically runs from the crank gear, the water pump, to the cam gear. You have one tensioner for that. It's the one that looks like this here. This part here hooks onto this, and I'm just going to let that sit there. This bolt here is the bolt that goes for the spring that works that tensioner. It belongs here. But while I'm doing the tensioner, it's the only one that I have that'll fit in here right now. I'm going to go ahead and thread it in here for now, so that way I can put some tension on this when I'm ready to. All right, that guy will come out later and go in its correct position. This is just to get the tensioner set for the timing belt. All right, I'm ready to go ahead and start putting the belt on. Again, I'm going to make sure that these directional arrows are pointing in that direction. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to drop that over the top of the cam gear like this. The next step is to go around the water pump, and you want to pull that. This side needs to be tight right now, not so much this side. And then we're going to go over the top of the tensioner there. Once you're over the top of that tensioner, it's time to go down across the cam gear in the front. All right, there we go. That does take a little massaging down here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some pressure on this tensioner here, bring it up, and then I'm going to lock it down right here. And this is not the final tightening of this, but what I need to do is make sure that I rotate the engine 4 times, and I'm going to come back and check and make sure that all my timing marks still match up, so that I'm confident that I have each one of these gear teeth mated up with the right spot of the timing belt. So all I'm going to do is put just a little pressure on that. Down is no tension, up is tension. So put a little pressure up like that, and then tighten down this nut here. All right, with the 19 on the end of this, again, I'm going to count my engine rotations using the key here at the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, going counterclockwise. When I'm finished, I want to make sure that all of my timing marks still line up. There's 1. 2. 3. 4 there. All right, here we are. You can see the triangle tooth is pointing up into the marks on the timing or the oil pump, and then up here, that's pointed straight up and down exactly. So we're going to call that good. Now we're going to move on to the balance shafts. All right, your next, you need to put the next tensioner on. This is the one for the balance shafts here. It has 2 sides. You see that one has the flat side and the other side is all round. The all round side goes in like this. And then hopefully you kept up with this guy. It has a bend in it. That bend points that way, and it has a flat spot here that makes up that flat spot on your tensioner there. It bolts in here, and you have the only bolt that you have left for the front of this 10 millimeter here that has that shoulder on it, and you want that shoulder to thread through the hole in the shaft here. All right, and that's just barely finger tight. I'm not going to worry about that anymore. All right, and then you have this funky looking nut that goes on the front here and a washer that goes with that. Again, that's just hand tightened down because I want to be able to move that tensioner up and down. In this application, up is no tension at all in the belts, and down is full tension. Okay. All right, this is the front balance shaft of the engine. We talked about it in the previous video, link up here. And the one that's going to be on the right over here, the back one over here as well. First of all, this mark on the outside, while the engine is at top dead center, it needs to be in the 9 o'clock position here. Also on the top of this is a divot on the shaft back here that will line up with that mark right there. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate this shaft until I have those marks lined up. You do that with your hand, no problem. Okay, so you see somebody's already put some paint on this one once upon a time. So that one's lined up at the top, and this one's at 90 degrees. All right, in the previous video where I made a pretty big error was I didn't explain fully what I was doing here. I already knew that I had my mark where it was supposed to be because I'd already checked it with this inspection port back here. What I'm going to tell you to do now is go ahead and just take this bolt here off for the inspection port. And then same as from the previous video, we're going to insert our screwdriver in here, and we're going to rotate this until that screwdriver goes all the way down and locks in position. Which is right there. So how I did that is I basically just keep stabbing as you rotate that around until you find where it goes all the way in, and then you can no longer turn the gear. So again, our mark lines up just like I showed you before. Remember where I put the paint on, and it still lines up with this mark on the back of the oil pump. All right, I'm back with this gear here. This is the gear for the balance shaft belt, timing belt. It's keyed, goes right over the top here. There we go. All right, and here's our balance shaft belt. Again, this one also has directional arrows on it. Again, this engine rotates counterclockwise, so we're going to make sure we have those pointed in the right direction. You see on the front of this gear and this gear, it has this lip on the front, like so the belt can't slip off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the belt over those two gears first, come under the timing belt, and then across the top of this back balance shaft belt. All right, with that now slipped on, I'm going to push down on this and go ahead and put some tension on that. Okay, with that down, now I'm going to come back and I'm going to check my marks and make sure everything's still lined up where it's supposed to be, and we're good to go there. Okay, we're ready to take that screwdriver out of the back, and I'm going to run the bolt down for that inspection port, make sure it's good and tight. All right, for this last part here, what I'm going to do is make sure I have the tensioners set right, and that is not done. That's done with the springs. It's not anything that we've done thus far. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that that's finger loose, and this one is finger loose, so this one can move. I'm also going to take this bolt out back here that we used before, and I'm going to move it up to its correct position up here. Okay, this bolt that I just moved from down here up here is actually, what it is a place to hang a spring on, and it's this guy right here. If you look behind this tensioner here, there is a hole in this position that you want to hook one side of that spring through. All right, once I have that spring connected to the rear tensioner the way it's supposed to go, I'm going to bring a screwdriver in, and I'm just going to pull it up over the top of that hanger right there. There's a second spring for this side. It's going to go here and here like that. All right, and with that finger tight, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come back and I'm going to put my crank bolt back in, and then we're going to rotate the engine. All right, and now to set the proper tension on these belts, let the springs do the job they're supposed to. What I'm going to do is I'm going to back the crank backwards just a little bit, and as I do that, you can watch these things kind of seat into where they're supposed to be. So it's not much till it just starts to move, and you can see as I was getting up to the point where it moved, everything kind of pulled in on itself. Once that happens, we're going to go ahead and tighten these two back down. There is a torque spec for this one here. Since I'm not going to go to the trouble trying to lock up the engine to torque it exactly right, I'm just going to run it down with my impact right there. All right, after that happens, what I suggest you do is you come back and you rotate your engine a couple of times, and at the end, you come back to top deck center, and you want to make sure that everything is back where all the marks are lined up where they're supposed to be, and you should be able to call that a well-timed engine. All right, there you go. So with these, they're not like alternator belts, the timing belts. You want just enough slack in them where that you have enough to turn them 90 degrees, and probably not much more than that. So that is the perfect amount of tension in these two belts. With that done, we're ready to put the timing cover back on. This is set exactly where it needs to be. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's video. Just a quick recap of what we've done. We've installed the crank position sensor, the camshaft, the rocker arm assembly. We have the tensioners put on the front, all the gear pieces that were off are now on, lined everything to where it was supposed to be, and we set the timing belt and the balance shaft belt. There's a lot of information in this video. Go over it slow, make sure that you have it right. Any mistake here can ruin your engine. So always keep that in mind when you're working on the timing on the engine like this. With that being said, if this is your first time visiting the channel, please be sure to check out my other videos. If you're returning and you've been keeping up with the F23 rebuild series, I appreciate the support. Thank you very much. If anything in this video looks like it's going to help you out, please be sure to leave me a like. If you have any comments, criticisms, things you might have done better, leave a comment in the comment section and we can go over that. I'm sure there's some Honda Tech guys out there that have a better way, or maybe can add some insight to how I installed that rocker arm assembly on the top. That's a little tedious, and that's probably not the way a Honda Tech would do that, but it worked, and I'm quite certain that we had that right. With all that being said, again, thank you very much for visiting, and I will catch you in the next video.